Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowdon Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our guest today, making a return visit, Benoît Dubreuil, who is Quebec's French Language Commissioner, who this week, or last week, issued a new report, and I'm going to try to put this as favorably as I can, on stabilizing the decline of French here in the province of Quebec, which encompasses a whole lot of suggestions to the government. These are not It's not new legislation, but these are suggestions being made to the National Assembly. So, Mr. Dubreuil, first of all, thank you for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
And I guess we begin with, we have to discuss the choice of words. We're talking about stabilizing the decline of French. It seems this government, anyway, has been talking about that now for quite some time, this CAC government. And we have numbers that seem to come out that suggest that French continues to be in decline, in peril. I'm not sure what word we want to use. So what's the nature of your report? What are you most concerned with?
Yeah, maybe I can just give some background about why I did this at this time, right? Because the Charter of the French language says that every 5 years, the Office québécois de la langue française has to produce a report that will provide a general overview of the status of French. And then the Charter says that within 6 months, the Commissioner of the French language has to provide an analysis of this and has to recommend measures to the government. So I'm doing this because that's what the Act is asking me to do. So obviously, to be able to recommend measures that will be relevant, we need to come up with a diagnosis of what is going on in society, what is the situation, where do we need to act that will be relevant. And that's what we did in previous studies that we published a couple of weeks ago, in which we try to document more precisely where are the areas where French is going down and why it is going down and by how much. And that's what we did. And then the measures that we are designing aim at targeting precisely those mechanisms that are responsible for the drop in French.
Can I ask before you go on, with respect to the idea that French is going down, we've had reports that it is going down on one hand and reports on the other hand that it's not. Who are we supposed to believe on that?
Yeah, that's the summary that we offer in these studies. So if I put it like very quickly, for what is of the workplace, I don't think there's any doubt it is going down, maybe by 3-4 percentage point over 20 years for Quebec as a whole. Obviously, it is concentrated in Montreal, in Gatineau, and obviously it is concentrated in a number of areas: finance, IT, professional services, federal government. So it's very much focused on those sectors where the drop is very steep.
But you see that from an Anglo point of view, but yet there have been studies that show that young Francophones are actually even less inclined to speak French than most people had thought. So
exactly. So the first area is the workplace, where it is very much connected to demographic changes and economic changes. And then the second place where French is going down very significantly is in culture. And here it connects more closely to what you say, where we have all these digital transformation that is making huge changes in the life of Francophones and of everyone, but it has an impact on the exposure to French in the cultural domain. And where it is more stable, it's in what we call the public sphere, which includes like the language that you will use when you go to the convenience store, the shopping mall. And here, the problem is that when we look at the surveys from the Office québécois de la langue française over the past 15 years, we see that it is stable, but at the same time, there's pretty large margin of error because we are talking about surveys. So I think it's kind of inconclusive. Maybe it went down by 1-3%, but we cannot really tell at the moment.
So, I mean, there are a lot of elements to your report. One of them, and we talked about this the other day on the radio, and it's the one that concerns me the most. You have an issue. So let's first of all acknowledge in Quebec, we forced people to go to French schools. That was a good step in the right direction, right, as far as solidifying French. There's French instruction now in colleges. You want to extend that. You think, I think, based on the report, if I read this right, that there needs to be more French being taught in CEGEP and in universities, despite the fact that there's French being offered now. Why, and you mentioned some of the sectors, why is this necessary?
Yeah, so I think to explain why I came to this conclusion, we need to go back to the 60s and the 70s and how we designed the existing framework with French instruction, Bill 101. I think like the challenge that we had like in the 60s that appeared was that the integration of immigrants would be a challenge if we did not have stricter regulation of the language of instruction, right? And the idea from the perspective at the time was that, like, if we have people enroll in French schools, basically they will kind of become francophone. They will socialize in French. They will have French friends, and at the end of high school, they will just adopt French as other francophones. And if people go to English school, they will do the same, but in English, right? And at the time, in the 70s, I think the boundaries between the groups were much more stricter, and it probably made sense to think that way. Now, we know that things are much more complex, and we have a lot of studies, and we have a better understanding of how the experience of second generation kids in high school will lead to different behavior, linguistic choice, and everything. Okay.
I will suggest, by the way, as you lay out that sort of scenario, your concern seems to be that even though we're getting these kids to go and study and be in school and speak in French, that outside of school, that social interaction, which you would want to see in French, has not happened, isn't happening, and that's a concern.
I think the concern that we have with respect to immigration, second generation, is that we have managed to generalize certain level of proficiency in French because people are educated French language of instruction. Transferring this knowledge into use is more of a challenge. And this has implications for the workplace, and this has implications in culture. And that's really, I think, the number one concern at the moment.
And how do you
made
that?
reference, though, to the fact that the French language benefited back in the 70s when there was a huge migration of Anglos that left.
Yeah.
But some people have interpreted that as, is that the wish?
No, yeah. I think we need to move beyond process of intention on this one if we want to move the discussion forward. I think that's history that we need to acknowledge, right? I mean, this happened. I know that it was, it has led to very difficult situation for a number of English families, that in the English communities there is this idea that people are constantly leaving. I think we need to acknowledge this. It is part of the language situation. At the same time, today this has changed, right? Today the exchanges between Quebec and Canada for what is of the English community are more or less stable. So, and my preference would be for this to remain as is.
So to get back to your idea then of somehow being able to force more social interaction, to try to have it become a more homogenous, if you will, what's your suggestion with respect to schooling? What do you want to see happen? Because we saw that number 85%, so explain what that means.
The challenge we have in school, in fact, we have, I think, two main challenges with respect to French in schools. It goes back to immigration. Okay, so we have a significant portion of immigrants who arrive to Quebec who will adopt English at entry point and will maintain it through time. Okay. Also, there is a majority that knows French at entry point and will basically maintain it through time. What it gives in school is that depending on where you are in the city, where you are in Quebec, the language of the playground will not be the same, right? So in a school, you always have two language courses at the same time. You have the language courses that happens in the classroom that you can determine when you decide the language of instruction, and then you have the second course that is happening on the playground, and today we can add on Fortnite at night on Snapchat. So and this second course, you determine it depending on who you bring in the system, how you design your class and everything, and you don't have like a lot of direct control on that. Okay, so what is happening in Quebec now is that in a number of elementary schools and then secondary schools, when kids arrive at 6 or 7 years, they're better in English than in French. Okay, so and they want to play. And obviously kids want to play, and they use the tool that they have most available to play. Right. And then we end up in this situation that is very familiar to other linguistic minority elsewhere on the planet, where you impose a language of instruction, but then kids just play in the other language. And then teachers don't know how to react to this. They remind kids, oh, you should speak French, or you should. Obviously, it will not work, and it does not work. So how can we change this? Because the consequence then is that when kids end up in high school, they end up knowing French, but more what we would call school French, which is a little bit more rigid, and which they are not always totally comfortable using for expressing their emotion, for being creative, for consuming culture. Okay, and this is a part of the kids who then, a significant part of the kids who then move choose an English college. So how do we fix that? It's not easy. It's not easy, and it will not be easy, and we won't be able to change this.
But why do we have to fix it at all?
Yeah, because what we see is that at the end of high school, it includes a pressure on French, and I think that if we want to build some form of social cohesion around language in Quebec, we need to be able to secure both the francophones and anglophones that at the end their language is stable, and that the situation will not evolve in a way that constantly make them weaker. So I think it's part of the kind of the deal that we can make as a society to say there is a place for everyone, and French is not going to constantly
But
go
on
down.
a university level, how does this mitigate, how does this make a difference?
Yeah, so the challenge we have is that we need to fix the problem upstream, but now we have this situation where we have a number of kids who go out of high school. Okay, and this is not new, right? This exists since the adoption of Bill 101
right.
35 years ago. At the end of high schools, we have a significant number of kids who move from French high school to English college or English universities. You have different types of profile, different types of group. Some of them are very, very francophones, already speak English, but are looking for an additional challenge, want to improve their English. This is not that worrying, okay? Those are the people who are most likely to maintain French after. Then you have a group of people who are already better in English from the start, although they were schooled in French, okay? Because they use English as a vernacular since they are...
It's their day-to-day language.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Typically, they are kids coming from those cultural communities where English is
right.
the lingua franca. And typically, they're waiting for high school to finish to move to the English system, right? And then you have another group who can be attracted for more cultural reason to the English system, and I could say more about this also. But then what happens in the English university or college, obviously, is that if you have people who are already better in English, and then for 5, 6, 7 years stop doing French, socialize much less in French than they were socializing before, then I'm really worried that we can see a decay in their competencies and strengthen the preference they have for using English. And we also see from the numbers that there are career choices that are markedly different for people who prefer French and for people who prefer English. So we have a labor market that is pretty much polarized. Okay, so when you look at second generation, for instance, or people do not have an immigration background, they don't choose the same field of study, they don't choose the same field of work. So if you think of finance, as I said, IT, professional services, federal government, they would be very attractive to kids of second generation who tend to prefer English. And kids who tend to prefer French, they will go in other sector, including the public sector, including, yeah.
But it's interesting as you break this down, and we've heard this before. So let's say you live in Quebec, you're an Anglophone who does in fact speak French. Perhaps you don't necessarily have all your social interactions, or as many as you think they could or should have. You would never apply for a job at the provincial government because you know you have an English name where you're never going to get hired. So it would seem to me it works both ways.
Yeah, no, that's true, because I have been a hiring manager in both the federal public service and the provincial public service. So I've been hiring people on the two sides, and I can tell you that the resume that I get are not the same. In Quebec City, by the way, public service in Quebec City is increasingly diversified, but the resume that we get are mostly from immigrants or children of immigrants from francophone backgrounds. Sure. And when I was a hiring manager in Ottawa, the resume that I received were more diversified, typically more Asiatic than from francophone countries. So we see these gaps. There's something that makes Anglophones in Quebec not completely comfortable applying for jobs in environment that French is predominant. And we are moving, I think, in a direction in which for many francophones applying, for instance, for a job in finance...
But they're not encouraged either on a certain level. You don't hear a lot of, well, come on, Anglos, start applying for government jobs.
Okay, so I will just make an appeal for Anglos to apply for jobs in government, including for the French language commissioner. I would love to hire an Anglophone. I don't have a position open at the moment, but it will come. It will come. Yeah, but no, you're right. I mean, we still have a job to do, to increase also the level of confidence among Anglophones. But I think
more open arms.
Yeah. I think we need to be more explicit. because a lot of Anglophones are very, very bilingual. At the same time, it's what I said earlier, also it's kind of school French, right? They don't necessarily have a lot of socialization with Francophones outside of the school. And this has a huge impact on your level of confidence and your level of ease in actually speaking the language on a daily basis.
You know, as you talk about out of sort of into college, into university, we know now, like, for example, and this government provincially passed that law requiring you now to take French courses, even as part of your English education, once you're out of elementary school. Are you suggesting the same kind of thing should happen in universities?
Yeah. I think it is a way forward. I think it could be a way that is worth examining.
But isn't then only grammar, and that's what you think is not really necessarily going to help you in learning French. You're learning university French because you're forced to, but you're not really learning any social interaction.
Yeah, that's why I think it won't be enough. That's why I think we also need to work upstream in school. I think it could be good because if you stop doing any kind of school French, even for 6-7 years, and then you study finance, you study IT, you do like 3, 4, 5, 6 years of those studies without being getting familiarized with the French terminology, then obviously your tendency will be to use only English terminology. But it's not going to solve the problem that I mentioned.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Deli, serving Montrealers since 1946 and home of the city's best smoked meat sandwich, the Snowdon Deli, DeCarry Boulevard, north of Queen Mary Road. But yet, as we've talked about this before, let's say you bring up finance, if you want to work in finance. And of course, the answer would be for most people, well, finance on an international business scale is conducted for the most part in English. You need English to be able to work in that milieu. So why would you want to have someone who wanted to work in that field and force them to necessarily learn more French when English is the language they're going to be using in that job?
No, that finance is a good case because if you look at the labor market, obviously the labor market is complex and you have all range of organizations. Some of them are only focused on Quebec. People have only interactions in Quebec, and in some jobs, people are working full-time serving clients or with colleagues that are outside of the province. And between the two, you have a whole continuum of situations where people work with people from Quebec or with people from outside. So in finance, and typically in most finance job, you will have a number of clients from outside of Quebec, but you also will have colleagues here. If you work in finance, capital market for Desjardins, for instance, you will have your team in Toronto, but you will also have your team in Montreal. So the idea is not to say let's stop talking to people in Toronto, or federal government is the same thing, right? I think we can manage this interface if we strengthen the norm, if we strengthen the preference for people among Quebecers of different origins, of different language. Let's converge a little bit more often towards French when we are among us. Let's use this secret power that we have to speak French, and then when we have a meeting with American colleagues, okay, then we will speak English.
But isn't conversely the problem that if you haven't learned that English and you're in a French school, you won't be able to have that conversation with a colleague in English?
Yeah, I think the situation right now is very different from the situation when I was young, because when I arrived at 17 or 18 years old, I had no exposure to I had no exposure to English ever. Today, I mean, the level of proficiency in English among young Francophones is going up like crazy, and I think we need to be.
Well, what do you blame that on? Social media?
Oh, it's exposure through through social media, through 3 hours of TikTok and television videos, YouTube every day, and it pushes up English proficiency.
That's universal, though.
That's universal, and that's even more present here because because we have this exposure elsewhere in society, and parents also pay a lot of attention to this. Parents want their kids to be bilingual, and this is not going to stop. Like, even if I wanted to stop this, I would not have any tool to stop this.
Unless you outlawed it, or the government outlawed it, like you're going to do in Australia now.
And there would be other reasons to do this for the development of kids, but that's another...
But one of the big areas of concern, there's a lot of ambiguity, that the numbers that you've come up with, 85%, and then you have a varying system of numbers going down depending on how many people are registered in... I think that's thrown people off because they see 85%. And there's a lot of fear, as you can well understand, after like the English universities here got hit with all sorts of issues in terms of enrollment for foreign students. could you elaborate?
And you're fully aware that I've been criticized on the other side.
Yes, I am.
It is not sufficiently hard.
I am aware. And
yeah.
But could you elaborate a bit about those numbers, please?
Yeah, maybe clarify to Bill's point the idea, and I asked you this as well.
Yeah.
You don't want to see Bill 101 implemented at the university level.
No.
Yeah,
some people, I mean, and a lot of people are pushing for this at college level. Then sometimes you hear also at the undergraduate level, and that's not a recommendation that I put forward. And so maybe start with the 85 percentage,
yes.
Because some people might find it is silly just to come up with a number. My take on this is that if we can agree on a number, and that's the same thing. I had the same argument for immigration. I don't want to, like, if we can have a number, agree on a target on how much French new immigrants should arrive, and we can design our immigration policy in a way to meet this target. What I think is that it will help us move forward as a society that is divided by those issues, right? And that's the intention. If I put no number, I think Francophones and Anglophones can have the feeling that it will never end. But if we have a number and we agree on a number, my idea is that collectively we can move toward the target, and it will favor social cohesion between Francophones and Anglophones. So because I just want to reassure Anglophones that the objective is not to get rid of English. I think that's the
Can you say that again? What?
The objective is not to get rid of English.
I see.
Yeah. So
you haven't heard it here first. Okay.
Yeah. No. But I think that's an important point, because when you look at the way Bill 101 functions in high school, mechanically it reduces the share of English in high school, and this was something that was noticed already in the year 70, right? So if we implement this approach also in higher education, it will do exactly the same thing. So the idea that I'm trying to promote is, say, maybe we can have a rule that will strengthen the predominance of French, while at the same time recognizing the place of English and giving English institutions the room to develop their mandate. Okay, so that's kind of the principle. I think it is useful politically to come up with this type of agreement. And then people can disagree and think it is silly and think that we should not come up with some arbitrary number.
To break down those numbers.
Yeah. So that's the other point. My suggestion is that we should look at the overall percentage of teaching in French that happens in higher education institutions. So the problem is that when it comes to universities are very complex organizations, right? They have all kinds of programs, some small, some big. If you want to apply a rule that will be one size fits all, it won't work in a universities. Okay, in college it works because, like, you have this kind of common education for everyone that is the same. So that's why it was easy to say, let's do 3 courses of French for everyone. It's easy in Cégep, right? In universities you can't do that because all programs are different. So the idea that I put forward is inspired by what I've seen in Catalonia. So I went in Catalonia this summer for my private vacation, and I took the time to have a discussion with a number of social linguists. And
so
people.
If you're going to explain Catalonia, part of Spain,
but
want to separate from Spain.
Well, I mean, they have a debate. Have a debate, and long time debate. As we have, they live with this discussion since as long as we do. Right. But they have a plan to strengthen the place of Catalan in Catalonian universities, with respect to Spanish and with respect to English. Okay. And basically what they did is that they said we have 60% of courses in Catalan, and we'll try to reach 80. But we are not going to have some kind of one-size-fits-all approach for all universities or program. We are going to sit with universities and see how they can achieve these targets in a way that does not threaten their finance and in a way that makes sense from their programming.
So I think of the idea that, we talk about McGill and Concordia as the 2 institutions that have been affected the most so far by these new regulations. But there are lots of French colleges and universities here, and I'm sure, I would guess they teach finance and IT and everything else. Would a solution not be simply to have more French universities be made available to people who wanted to go, as opposed to forcing English universities to incorporate more classes in French?
Yeah, so I think we need to do a number of things. I think there's a way to rebalance foreign students. We need to consolidate the recruitment of French foreign students in French universities. We are making progress at the moment. We can still make further progress, especially also in Cégep. I think we can make investment maybe in French universities where there are good opportunities for growing French universities, and there will be growth. We know that there will be a 10% growth over the next 10 years, so we can take this as an opportunity. At the same time, I don't think we will get far enough with these measures. So that's why I'm suggesting to have a part of French teaching in English universities.
Yeah, because I think maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but you think an English university is there as an English university to teach in English.
Yeah.
You want to see more French incorporated into those English universities, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we can have the debate, but I think it is a reasonable approach that will help us keep these universities approximately the same size as they are, by at the same time mitigating the effect on French that I see based on my diagnosis of what is happening earlier. Mm-hmm. Do you see the point? So my target is really those people who come out of French high school, go to English Cégep, and then enroll in English universities, and then will spend a number of years without being in contact with French. So I think at the same time, what we have a job to do in French high school. Okay, we have a job to do to make sure that kids from communities who don't have a lot of opportunities to interact with Francophones, we need to build those opportunities to interact with Francophones. We need also to strengthen the sense of belonging. That's something I did not talk about, but when we look at qualitative studies on the school experience of children from an immigration background in French schools, very often we see that people do not identify to Quebec, do not have a strong sense of belonging, and do not perceive Quebec culture as something to which they belong. And this is not unique to Quebec. Okay, like in all countries of immigration, we have this phenomenon with second generation kids who can tend to develop an identity that is in tension with the identity of the majority. But how it plays out in Quebec is that we see a lot of kids at 17, 18 years old who are very, very Francophone, speak French better than English, but say, I do not belong to this French culture, and I am going to enroll in an English college because I feel more welcome.
How do you force someone to get involved in French culture, though? I mean, that's how they identify, that's their background. How do you...
I think we really need
go back
to change.
To social media over again.
I think we really need to change our approach to French and to culture in schools. I think we have a problem in schools that all the system is designed to have people like me learn to write and learn to manage past participles. That's what the French system is meant to do. It is not meant to have kids who come from a totally different cultural background have opportunity to socialize and have opportunity to be exposed to Quebec French culture and broader French culture during their education. Yeah, to have people actually have the opportunities to meet people who produce this culture, to get engaged with people who produce this culture. It happens at a very limited scale. So you can grow up in Montreal, like we are in Côte-des-Neiges here. You can grow up in Côte-des-Neiges, arrive at 17, 18 years old, and you've basically never met a kid that is not from immigration background. I've never engaged with an artist that is promoting culture in French. And how can you fall in love with French in this case? Sure. For you, French will be ministerial exam, past participles, and grammar.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, I went to school, I learned French grammar very well in elementary school, high school, and all the rest. But my knowledge of French is from the street, mostly. And I mean, interactions, not from school, not from knowing how to conjugate.
Yeah, but to your point, if you grew up here, like in Côte-des-Neiges, that street, you're not going to pick it up on the street in this part of the city, for example,
like
right?
Downtown Outremont, I mean, I did pick it up. And I mean, but the point is that it's ingrained in you outside of school as well, not in school, is my point. And the idea would be to get more people to interact, and you're absolutely right. And I live near a French high school, and when they come out, I mean, a lot of our immigrants who are French, but Francos, they're all speaking English to each other after school, like they're fooling around and joking. And I think that's an issue.
No, but that's something that I see in my personal life in French schools. So the objective is really to have these opportunities for people actually to meet. That's why I think, and people have not paid a lot of attention to these measures, but for me they are the most significant. We need to put culture and cultural discovery at the center of the school project in French schools. And when I say French culture, it's Quebec culture, but it's also the broader culture in French, which is extremely rich. And I think that should be of interest to kids from everywhere. Like, we need to show that there is a space to which you will have access that is wonderful, that is great, that is extremely rich if you become good in French. And also the other thing that we are proposing that has not been discussed very much is the idea of having large-scale twinning between schools.
Large-scale?
Twinning. Does it exist? Like interchange between...
yes,
exchanges.
Okay.
Yeah, so that at every year people will engage in different projects with partner schools that will come from a different environment.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and we have we have this.
We do foreign exchange here, like with.
No, but that's true. I can tell you, like, what are the trips for my kids in high school in Quebec City? They go to New York, Boston, Washington, Philadelphia. So do you see some kind of
yeah.
So it's all about going to major U.S. city. Why don't we take this money and this time to actually build connections between people who come from all over the world and who will live here for the rest of their life, right? So we have there's this wonderful teacher in I think she's in Nicolette. She's called Isabelle Bergeron. She launched by her own initiative a school correspondence project, and she matches, I think, 10,000 kids from here, Côte des Neiges, to people in Centre du Québec. And very often they do school trip to go there. They bring young kids here from Filipino origin to meet their new friends. So I think we need to do this. And the challenge with these initiatives, because there are all kinds of funny things that happen, interesting things that happen in schools, that it's very hard to do this at the required scale. Everybody loves those exchanges, but it's always like small initiative, depend on the teacher, and everybody like it, but we need to take this and do this like full scale so that it really plays a role in the way we define our identity and the way we come in connection, in relationship with one another.
Okay, we have to wrap up because we're running late.
One last question. From your lips to the ears of the CAQ government, has Monsieur Robert, Monsieur Drainville, have they commented? Have they spoken to you about this, implementing your recommendation?
Yeah, so what we are doing at the moment is that we are meeting with senior officials of those departments, explaining the recommendation. We did this also with the different parliamentary groups at the National Assembly, because we work first and for all for the National Assembly. Got a lot of questions, got a lot of interesting discussions with the different parliamentary groups, and then we do the same thing with the senior officials of the different departments, and then obviously it will be for the government to decide what to do with this.
Do you have any indication?
No clear indication, but I feel, and it's not only about the government, I think it's also about the different parliamentary groups. I think we are kind of moving forward in terms of our interpretation of what is going on and what we should do. Like, I think for what is of language policy in Quebec, we have long been discussing like requirements, law, obligations, verifications, and I think at this point we just realized that it cannot be only this. Like, it has to be about the love of the language and the use of the language in our different...
You know what? This is bad because you're losing your French by being exposed to all this English on social media, and consider doing the same thing here and just shut out English, shut it out completely from social media.
Yeah, I don't think it would be feasible and desirable and legal. There are interesting public health debate about way kids are exposed to screen, especially before school age. And at the same time, I think we should avoid being too defeatist about the place of French on social media. Very often people my age, people your age, we have the impression that French does not exist on social media. It's true that English is very present, but we have a lot of very good content creators from Quebec who are very active on social media.
Okay.
They have hundreds of thousands of followers. We have a few ones who have millions of followers from Quebec. So it means that they also have a large audience in France. I think we should also rethink our cultural policy to see how we can support these guys, how we can make sure that we have a content that is interesting, might have even more. And the problem is that there is such a generational gap that people my age typically they have no idea what their kids are actually watching on social media. So I can give you like 10 names maybe of the top YouTubers in Quebec. And no, I would recognize them because I started to be interested in this because I saw that there was a problem. But when I talk with people my age, my friends, they have no idea who they are. But we are talking about people who have hundreds of thousands of followers and do original content in French that is extremely funny, extremely interesting, and that could be even bigger because French is a big market, right? Not as big as English for sure. But we have 300 million speakers, and we have people in Quebec who are developing content, are very popular in France, very popular in Africa, and we can grow even bigger.
All right, and that's where we will leave it. I thank you so much, Monsieur Dubreuil, for coming in.
Thanks.
Thank you, and I should mention that I want to thank you because Monsieur Dubreuil took a train in from Quebec City
just to be here.
Yeah.
And worse, he's taking a bus to go back. Thanks for watching this edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.